I just got finished watching Weaponized News and recommend it to anyone who's interested in keeping up with dry editorial news dispatch of fairly reasonable direction, which is to say, concerned. Because I got mixed up with some people who were working with Brian Eno in the early 80s, when Reagan was in power and Bowie helped him masquerade a temper tantrum about Lenin to cover for the AIDS attack in a mysterious, magical, three dimensional, fourth dimensional chessboard of media. People know about it, and then there's people who don't know about it. And I'll try to summarize it quickly, the situation I found myself in as the child of a humanist from Bush's ship in the Navy at University of Pittsburgh Medical Library, where philosophy is very strong at the University of Pittsburgh. Derek Parfit showed up. He's a consequentialist from Oxford. He thought of the repugnant conclusion, the more you give away the wealth of the rich, the more poor people you have because it's not sustainable distributively, which sounds like Malthusian economics. I was not a philosopher. I was never taught sign language. I was a dishwasher keeping a roof over the head of a friend who painted. Arguing with my mother when I was $50 short from rent and so on. To protect him. He was a friend. I wanted to see him paint. Met him at the governor's school. But consequentialism is a strange thing for Eno to be masquerading behind. Janusz Varoufakis, the Greek, who interviews Eno from time to time on global espionage topics of the Putin direction, is concerned supposedly about Gaza. Well, they've belabored ad nauseum Ringo Starr's psychopathy towards me, and they just endless streams of stupid questions. If they angle out with such venom that it alarms me, they've endangered me, they've injured me, they've tortured me, they've killed people, they've raped my friend. So it's really very serious British espionage powers of practice. Over a postcard, they shot up a bowling alley with the help of Seattle's Green Party. Subterfuge. It's gang hysteria over rock and roll status in the age of civil suspicion. And it's hard to avoid having what you say misconstrued or misused by them. I mean, John Stockwell of the CIA followed me to Allentown on my birthday in 1987. So what's happening in Gaza is a consequence of Brian Eno's mania about me. It's mania. And I'll try to explain what is at the root. I've gotten to know some people since I managed to escape Seattle who had me banned from college for 12 years while they pumped me full of psychiatric drugs and spread lies about me on behalf of museum thieves and Ripper murderers and rave massacre people. People behind the rave massacre. Seattle did all this stuff on their behalf, claiming they were progressive. They didn't allow me to go to school. They said I would fail, that I was paranoid schizophrenic, that I would be disruptive, that I was a troublemaker, that God knows what all they said. Using names like Bang, B-E-N-G, and Cats, which are straight from the Breitminster defense portfolio and the Zio puppet state of Hitler's. So what gives? I mean, I was investigating something. Now, people who've seen the evidence and gotten to know me have either laughed or rolled their eyes at the idea that somehow I was to blame, being blamed by Ringo Starr and Yoko Ono for John Lennon's whatever happened with him. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but you see, in order to avoid looking at the evidence, there would be consequences for people if the evidence was admissible. There's a roster of questions and particulars that I bring forward in my other tapes and in my writings, which they refuse to address. Ringo Starr must have a great big beach ball that overrides all that stuff, right? Makes total sense. I knew this guy, he had 5 Purple Hearts from Vietnam, and he said he had Indian blood. He was a Southern bigot. Now, somehow, Seattle's chief Seattle powwow, Sherman Alexie types have gotten on board with this tragic farce of endless interrogation of the issue. What is the issue for Ringo Starr? The issue for Ringo Starr is pretty simple. He claims that I had misread the letters because I was doing drugs and thought I was John Lennon. So I'm therefore to blame for John Lennon's murder. And he's like the IRS coming down on Al Capone. They use Valentine's Day and cards, allusions and letters from Yoko Ono to me in the 80s while they were finagling all this. The evidence, of course, shows that they were behind the whole thing. But people roll their eyes at the idea that John Lennon pulled a Houdini. They don't objectively roll their eyes at the idea that I had anything to do with it, which they certainly should. The biggest problem, most conspicuous problem with the booger picker idea that comes from Ringo Starr's snottery psychology is that the assumptions I made about Gail Burstyn, who is their partner. Her look-alike appears on a 1979 record of Robert Fripp. 1980 was the year that he pulled his Houdini, right? And they are advocates for her. When I reported what I believed that she was involved in the murder of John Lennon, the police told me to put my hands behind my back. They didn't arrest her, they arrested me. So what did I do that was the moral equivalent of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre? Well, I questioned Reagan. So this McCarthyite IRS is making me out to be a terrorist like Al Capone because I questioned Reagan for what were actually legitimate and good reasons. So there's Ringo Starr. Well, the problem is that the assumptions I made about Gail Burstyn, this person who they were defending by this bizarre interrogation, so-called consequentialism that's now rubbing out Lebanon. How's that for consequences? We're not drug-induced in the least. She was introduced to me by a local magistrate who was never questioned by the FBI for having introduced her to me. She went to Bryn Mawr. She sent me letters that were thick as a brick, full of Valentine's Day sugar-coated I love yous. She basically was trying to humiliate me so that Beth Blumenfeld would stop liking me. And this was Yoko Ono, the moral equivalent of rubbing out my rivals in a garage. I mean, literally trying to pin the tail on the donkey, trying to say that I was responsible for John Lennon's murder. These people make it very difficult to report anything. I disappeared for months into torture chambers. It was a Manson ordeal after reporting to the principal that I was going to be killed, and they didn't investigate. When Colucci robbed a woman of her purse, I got her purse back and reported to police. But he was working with the children of the police, so the police didn't do anything. We finally moved to get away from this pedophile gang. And I investigated to try to figure out what was going on, that this could happen. This widespread mechanical strategic organized crime could happen. But the assumptions I made about Gail Burston were that she went to Bryn Mawr. She was a pinnacle of the Jewish establishment. So she was presumed innocent, given every grace and assumption. I mean, I was always defending the Jews. I danced the hora. Hava Nagila sang Hava Nagila at the Pittsburgh Folk Festival when I was about 7 years old. My brother is Jewish. My father hated Germany. He was a World War II veteran who discussed history morally from that day, from the day he was in teachers' college with Eisenhower. The assumptions I made about Gail Burston had nothing to do with Ralph Karsh's marijuana or John Lennon's marijuana. Hysterical phobia that Donald Trump and Ringo Starr have brought to the table about being exposed for brutal trafficking of drugs, for empowerment of the people they claim John Lennon, is predicated on the idea that I should have absolutely railed against a 12-year-old Jewish girl. And they've sacrificed Gaza to it, Lebanon. I mean, I woke up in 1994. So it's really very crafty dementia. And the letters draw a little Eggman. You know, that's what they're doing. They're Eggmen. They're throwing eggs at people, you know, and at me. They called them persona non grata. And if you look at the history of poison gas and the history of cinema, those got off the ground about the same time. So Al Capone wasn't the hot dog that Joseph Goebbels was when it came to Xylon B and Bayerlich, Bavaria. You know, the Illuminati of eschatology and the drunken wrath of totalities, genocides beyond all genocides. So you're not really looking at what they did scientifically when you claim to be molesting an innocent person because you want to squeeze him for questions. They used poison gas on me and a nerve agent as a child. And this is completely inadmissible when it comes to Ringo Starr, because if he doesn't get away with what he has done, if he doesn't get away with doing what he's doing, what will happen is people will look at the evidence from the Magic Christian in which he starred, from Diva, from the script by Gail Burston. They will ask, why is there a 20-foot mural of Gail Burston playing violin down by Midori Teriyaki in Seattle Center? They will be allowed to ask questions that are legitimate. How is it somehow a concealed spiritual tribute to John Lennon to engage in the consequential witchcraft of Gaza genocide in Lebanon? You see, and the root of this, behind the face is Paul McCartney, who holds forth that, you know, the supernova massacre with the spirit of John Lennon. Well, these people were the ones who killed the supernova. You see, the Israelis set that up with Hamas. There was a passage in an article that disappeared. The idea was too provocative that the people who went to the supernova rave were the ones who would reproach with Palestine. They said tragically and ironically, but that was the whole point. That's why the Zios moved it into position on October 5th and held back, and then even came in and bombed it themselves. The supernova was a metaphor for Sodom and Gomorrah. It was a metaphor for the AIDS attack. They lit one up in the Lebanon port, and they have it mapped out here. The cosmonaut supernova is a symbol of the little boy bomb, which they chose me to be the messenger of. And how do they process that? They entangle me in international affairs and have a pornographic mosaic of me. It's extermination warfare. And the effort to make public broadcast and digest about it is an attempt to reach my peers with common sense. We don't want to turn over the keys to our democracy to the manufacturers of ever more effective poison gases. We don't want to hero worship. I mean, it's bad enough that we hero worship these folklore gangsters like Al Capone. It's bad enough that we like Clint Eastwood without going the road of glorifying Joseph Goebbels and death rays. And what I can't get is how come you're so wrapped up in extracting questions of a bizarre direction with no truth to their foundation to appease Ringo Starr. Then you are actually identifying, if you believe he was killed, who actually did it. You see, they have these tapes now that Mossad confessed to killing John Lennon. That's not what happened. Mossad were partners of Lennon in the Houdini that they pulled. But to see the evidence, you have to understand why Ringo is gumming everything up so you never get a chance to see the evidence. He thinks there's this huge question of whether if Jimmy hadn't smoked pot when he hitchhiked from Pittsburgh to St. Louis just to hear Robert Fripp play music in 1979, his love would have overcome his fear and he would have seen the light and saved John Lennon. And his assumption in all of that is that the benefit of the doubt that I afforded to Gail Burstyn was based on the pot that her gang was plying me with after nearly killing me and holding me hostage. And it wasn't. She was introduced to me by a magistrate. She went to Bryn Mawr. She was 12 years old. Ringo Starr lives in a sick fantasy world that shows he was a scriptwriter for the real world movie that this whole thing has played out as. It wasn't some good plan that Reagan happened to find. His attorneys for the whole thing, Israelis from the FEMA and the IDF, had me in D.C. in the day he claims he was shot. And they gave me a brochure. He came out and waved to me the night before. They gave me a brochure that says there's no such thing as objective reality, only what the jury believes. And believe it or not, I have the same name as Jimmy Carter, Jimmy C., Jimmy Creary, James McRyan Creary. I go by Matt Creary, his rival. And I was attacked by men named Ronnie and Casper. Ronnie Zzinski. And when I first got the message about what was happening, I actually believed Reagan. They said I framed him. It's sick illogic. And what is the consequences of this sicko logic, Mr. Eno? Is it you like Snortvich can evade the High Court at The Hague? Because that's the real consequence that you're trying to avoid.